the only talk radio show that takes you along with host and age explorer Rod Gontos on his continuing journey of discovery into life's challenges, opportunities, options, and all the latest and greatest things that come with getting older. The Raad Life is brought to you this week by Your Home for a Lifetime, a company dedicated to empowering you to stay safely, independently, and comfortably in your own home. And now here is your host, Rad Gontos.
What is happening, Paul? Are you there?
Is that a question?
Yes,
or?
what's happening, Paul? Like, what's happening, Paul?
What's happening?
What's up?
I just want to know, don't you ever bring any ugly people into the studio here? I'm on a petition for all the ugly people of the world here. We need more ugly people on this show.
Ugly people are people too? That's
right.
Tell me, hashtag
That's
ugly
right.
people are people too.
Me too. People.
There is no ugly people. They're just underappreciated and non-understood people. Okay. And I will say, though, he did ask that question when these ladies walked into the room earlier, and I said, what are you talking about? I have that already covered. You're here.
I'm the representative of that underrepresented group. Okay.
You know, so depending on the show's content, is either representing that, or he's he's our baby boomer,
crotchety old
poster
people,
child baby boomer, or he's doing his Walter Matthau from Grumpy Old Men.
That's right.
Right. So anyway, with that comedic relief at the beginning of the show, right, as we usually do.
That's my role.
Welcome everybody to the Raad Life. I'm really kind of excited about this show for a number of reasons, and a lot of people that know me will have heard me say, happy accidents. Things happen kind of like in being open and receptive to happy accidents in your life.
What, did you run into these people in your car?
Yeah, basically down the street, at Phil's coffee shop. They basically looked bored. I said, hey, listen, I need an hour to fill. Let's come to talk about this. But no, it started off actually, and I want to give a shout out to my friend and executive director for the Arab American Civic Council, my good buddy Rashad Al-Dabagh, for actually connecting us. It wasn't on my radar screen, to be honest, and he brought it to my attention because this lady sitting in front of me wrote a book called The Adventures of Laila and Ahmed in Syria, and I'm like, oh, it's a children's book. No, it's not just a children's book. It's so much more than a children's book. And then I started looking at all the people involved, and who's putting it out. And it's a nonprofit that she also helped found or co-found. I'm not sure if I'm having it right, but by the name of Beauty Beneath the Rubble, which is an amazing name, by the way. My sister said so it has to be true. I already shared it with her, and my sister said it was an amazing name. But it is an amazing name, especially and I'm going to let you basically explain the mission of that organization, and then how it really all ties into what we actually do here almost on a weekly basis. And Paul has said it a number of times, and that is the concept of long-form storytelling. But not just long-form storytelling, because he's Irish, so it's in his blood to basically tell stories that go on too long. And I think that's why they drink, because when the stories go on that long, you need to numb the pain, right? It's like, okay, aren't you done yet?
Probably true, though.
Right, it's true, right? but there's this thing, and in certain cultures, I think it's still very prevalent. I mean, you look at everything going back as far as the Bible, before the written format, right? The importance of storytelling in the human condition and how it translates everything, sorrows, joys, amplifies through song, whatever. And that all of a sudden when I started looking at this and the people involved, it really excited me, because this is one of those things which is something the story itself and the mission of the organization, if you will, through the storytelling, is something we can all embrace. There's no conflict. It's like, Syria is in conflict, that Middle East is always seeming to be turned turmoil. That this is something we can actually embrace, which is amazing approach to what it is that you're trying to do, which I tried to do through a show that we're trying to launch. We're still playing with it. I might have to talk to you about that later, right? But it's really talking about changing the narrative, or more accurately, probably, is providing an alternative narrative for people to basically look at, to embrace, to connect, because a lot of times the lack of understanding tends to be the underlying basis for xenophobia, discrimination, that I do not understand, I fear, right? And maybe some people that are subject to it more these days than others. It's our job or responsibility to also remind people.
So introduce your guests.
So I'm going to let my guests introduce themselves. which I don't usually do, but I want you to tell us about the organization,
Sure.
tell us about the mission organization, and I already warned you, I want the background story. Like you didn't wake up one morning and say, "Oh, this is what I'm going to do." So, from both of you guys, because I really like to hear how people find themselves today doing what they are doing. We didn't just get there.
Yes.
So, please.
Sure. I'm Nushana Liu. I founded the nonprofit Beauty Beneath the Rubble. And I also wrote the book, The Adventures of Laila and Ahmed in Syria. And prior to this, I actually I lived all over the Middle East. I was a diplomat working in the State Department. I did my master's degree in Arabic and then an MBA as well.
Which in its own self is a feat. Okay, anybody who was either born or learned that language knows that if you're doing a master's in Arabic, I mean,
yes,
that's a story in itself. How did you pick to do a master's in Arabic, by the way?
I think, we had a language requirement when I was at the University of Pennsylvania, and I took a lot of European languages, and I found them quite boring. And so, for my taste,
wow,
I needed a challenge.
It was not exciting enough.
And I
the romantic languages just didn't do it.
No romance in the romantic
exactly,
languages.
No romance. And then I took an Arabic class, and I started learning about Arabic poetry, and as you said, this long form storytelling, this culture of telling a story every night, where the oral tradition was so important. And the Arabic language has 4 times as many words as the English language. So you can just imagine the richness of, the richness
and what's
of
the
benefits of a master's degree in Arabic, ladies and gentlemen?
Are you?
Some fun facts.
Do you come from an Arab background? Are you Arabic?
No, actually, my family has a South Asian heritage, but they've been in East Africa for the last maybe 100 years. So I consider myself African or multi-ethnic in many ways.
Right.
And my mom was a refugee from Uganda, and my dad was actually living under Omani rule in Zanzibar.
Yep.
And he also experienced revolution and ended up, as many of us do, looking for opportunity in America.
That is a story that doesn't get told enough.
Yes.
Actually, about what happened in Zanzibar.
So are you Indian or Pakistani or?
No, I consider myself East African or ethnically ambiguous.
Ethnically ambiguous.
Ambiguous. I didn't see that on the census.
We only have the most interesting people on this show.
That's one they should add to the census.
Ethnically ambiguous. Hey, Rashad, I know you've been trying to get certain categories on the census, so maybe ethnically ambiguous will be less threatening for people.
No, I only ask you because I know a lot of South Asians, particularly Indians, moved to one reason or another came to Africa to open small shops and businesses and whatnot, and then have had discrimination and persecution and whatnot, been driven out of different countries, Uganda being one of them, where there was, I think they went through a whole kind of effort under Idi Amin and whatnot to get rid of a lot of the South Asian shop owners and whatnot. So, wow, what a travel around the world.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened, and not many people know about that.
I know this stuff.
But Paul, he's sitting over there, and wait, hold on, you're not even wearing your cargo pants today.
Jeans today.
You're actually very on brand, may I say, today. You're wearing your orange sweater and your jeans, the reflection of your generation of everything with jeans, basically. But then the orange sweater for your brand for Orange County Talk Radio. I'm very impressed, Paul.
That's right.
Yeah. But no, he's
smarter than he looks.
Scary little corner person, yeah. But yeah, no, that's another story. Again, speaking of stories that doesn't get told. So again, kudos to you for taking on Arabic as a master's, focus. And then you worked overseas.
Yes.
Okay, so give us a little background about that. How was it working overseas?
And what did you do
in what
overseas?
capacity?
You were with the State Department.
Because it's related to what we're talking about.
So you're working at different embassies on different projects?
Yes, I was working in different embassies. I was at the embassy in Lebanon, in Beirut, in Abu Dhabi. I was living in Syria doing my master's and also did Arabic study in Egypt. And in these countries, I also actually worked. So I worked at a female-owned marketing company in Syria. And so I got a flavor both of...
There can't be a lot of those in Syria. Yeah. I mean,
well, hold on a second. There comes your bias again.
That's right. I don't see the women's.
Would you ladies
movement.
Please correct him on the fact that it's not all second-class citizens and everybody's hidden? For God's sake, Paul.
It's not the whole.
I just finished saying how worldly you were.
That's all I see in the news. Yeah.
Well, Mace did grow up in Damascus, so she can vouch for that.
Yeah.
There's no businesses owned by women, right, Mason?
Oh, there is.
Exactly.
Plenty. Yeah, it's a very diverse city, and it's very forward-thinking when it comes to women's rights, especially when it comes to business and I would say political positions as well. So
interesting. Okay.
Yeah, no.
So you just got schooled.
Yeah. Okay. All we hear is disaster in Syria. Yeah.
No, it's. I'm glad that you guys are here because that is again part of the the need for an alternative narrative.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And you also, relevant to the book, and maybe this was a catalyst for you. I mean, I knew you worked with when the crisis in Syria started to happen. You were involved sort of with some of the people that were being displaced, right?
Yes. At that time, I was doing my MBA, but what happened is the year before the crisis, the students, some of my fellow students asked me to lead a trip to Syria. And it was a group maybe of 25 people filled, with people from different religions and different countries. And we had these volunteer type trips. So I put my heart and soul into this trip that I led to Syria because after I'd lived there for 2 years, I pretty much became a tour guide for Syria, essentially, because I had so many visitors.
And where were you? Were you in Damascus?
I was in Damascus.
And what did you do? We didn't clarify what you did for the State Department.
At that time, at the State Department, I was a Foreign Service officer, so a U.S. diplomat. I was doing that while in Lebanon, and I was on a U.S. actually government scholarship in Syria doing my master's degree. So at that time, the relations between the two countries were good enough that they would pay for people like me to go there and live there and study.
And that's not the case today?
Not at all, no.
Okay.
Unfortunately, things have gone sour.
Okay.
But these students, when I took them there, they were blown away. This was even before the war. They were blown away by the fact that Syria had so much diversity. People think of places like Syria or countries in the Middle East as being very monolithic in a way that it's only Arabs, only Muslims, no women's rights, where in fact, as Mace was saying, women's rights are, depending on your perspective, but women are very participating in the society there.
Absolutely.
There's so many different races, ethnicities, and religions. One thing that really blew people away was that one of the only towns that speaks Aramaic, which is the language of the Bible, is in Syria, and and they even are allowed to teach in elementary schools in Aramaic and preserve the language of the Bible.
Right, because it's a local culture that they're preserving.
Exactly,
exactly. Yeah.
And so things
and people
like that
forget that the Bible was originally written in several languages, not just Greek, but it was written in Syriac and Aramaic.
And Aramaic, exactly. So I think things like that really, when people came back, their own perceptions were changed so much, and that stuck with me for a long time.
Well, Syria is a beautiful country, right? I mean, it's so unfortunate what has taken place. And what's even more unfortunate, it's not an isolated case. I mean, you can go back throughout history, and there's these conflict centers where there's been cultures that's been decimated. There's been archaeological, historically significant things for not just that particular country, but just in terms of civilization as a whole that have been lost, right? So again, and it's, I can't think of a less threatening way to convey that than a story through the eyes of children.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so...
Well, first we got to introduce the other guest. She's sitting here quietly.
I want to ask, and either one of you guys, Mace, can take this if you want, but before I think we go there, is relevant to the nonprofit that you set up, right? Because what is the mission of the nonprofit specifically?
The mission is to change the narrative of places we associate with conflict. So when you turn on the news and you hear Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Ukraine, all you think about is war, destruction. I think you would think if you flew over there, there would be nothing to see.
You'd be shot at, yeah, right.
Exactly, you'd be shot at. There would be no life. Whereas, I traveled to Ukraine during the war, during the annexation of Crimea, and life goes on in all of these places.
They have no other choice.
They have no choice.
They have no other choice. I mean,
Yes.
I had family in Lebanon when it was all going on. My grandmother was there. I find it really kind of ironic, and I don't know that it is something that is necessarily... I'm not blaming the isolated attitude in the United States, because I think geographically it's just this massive country that's so far detached from something. You don't have that luxury if you're a country that has a border, 2 borders away from a country that has conflict. Like if you're Turkey or you're Greece or even if you're Italy, okay, you don't have the luxury of saying I don't know. You kind of have to know. Like growing up in Kuwait as a non-Kuwaiti, there was a war going on with Iraq and Iran across the border. We were still living there. It wasn't really something that touched us. But I can guarantee you that if you ask somebody that was basically all the way over here, the reaction would be, "Oh my God, that's not safe." I mean, I'm
Exactly.
planning to travel shortly here this month, right? And I'm going through to London to Amman, to Jordan. Okay, Amman, Jordan. Okay. I mean, like, what are they? Like number one, number two on the list of favorite countries in the United States, right? I mean, it's like Amman, Jordan. Okay.
Yeah.
I cannot tell you how many people have said to me, "Is it safe to go there?
Yeah.
Of course.
Is it, what is, because, isn't that like, don't they have problems there?" I'm like, have you looked at anything beyond like local news
Beyond
lately,
news,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So again,
Definitely.
but it's our responsibility, I think, sometimes to basically educate.
Yes, and like my dream is when someone hears about Iraq or Jordan or Lebanon, they would think, "Wow, what a beautiful place with an amazing history," versus, "Oh no, is it safe to go there?"
Well, I think historically that was the case, even with Europe. I mean, there was a sort of a romanticization of the Middle East by Europe, and there was this sort of the grand tour and all the locations and maybe it was the pyramids and Iraq, the bastion of civilization, the beginning of of civilization. Yeah, and I've told Paul this many times, but I guess it doesn't sink in. Yes, my grandmother, when I was growing up in Iraq, owned a business where she employed 3 or 4 women, and they basically copied everything or improvised on everything that was basically high fashion from magazines, right?
Yeah.
And she ran it out of her business, out of her home. So yes, no, women are absolutely integral to all. I mean, places like Syria, Lebanon. It's not all the same from one country to the other.
But clearly there are places like Saudi Arabia and others where that has not been the case. I mean, maybe they still have businesses, but where some of this perception isn't completely misplaced here. I mean, there's definitely a challenge for...
Yeah, but you don't paint the whole West Coast with what happens in North Carolina, do you?
Yeah.
That's true. Right, so you're saying that...
Or claim everybody has the
it's not
same
a-
social skills as people from New York. I mean,
Exactly.
you don't. It's interesting. I think it goes back to that thing of the unknown. It's unknown, so I fear it. I try to
Yeah.
put it in a nice little box, and we have. I will own it. I think we, as people from certain from the Middle East, we have basically acted for a long time like, well, why are we misunderstood? Why are we not basically seen for what it is that we have? And instead of putting energy necessarily in a very strategic and constructive manner towards changing the narrative, we have not. We've counted on people to act fair versus educate them to make it easier for them to basically connect the dots.
Exactly.
So, Mace, how are you involved with this?
So my role is a creative director and also a brand strategist for Beauty Beneath the Rubble. So I also took an active role in designing the book. So designing the book from a narrative storytelling, and then also like taking a look at what we needed to include as a brand and as a whole. So how do we talk about this story between those 2 youngsters, and also figure out how do we talk about this story in a way that is universal to all.
And give a little synopsis about the actual story.
The synopsis is that it's a historical and a cultural storytelling that helps children go through the different parts of Syria by understanding what the landmarks represent, what is the diversity about, and also what kinds of languages are in Syria. So it has like this very adventurous
Wait, they're not all the
twist.
same language?
No, not at all. So that's what's interesting, is that it is a diverse book. It touches upon a lot of different backgrounds that are in Syria. And we wanted to surface that as part of the culture of Syria.
You could almost call it like their trip through Syria, right? I mean, you're seeing it through their eyes.
You're seeing it through their eyes,
Yeah.
the different areas that they go through and the different experiences also.
So,
Yeah.
so how did this come about? Because I know that the nonprofit, and by the way, since we're talking about it, whoever wants to do it, but let's give both the nonprofit website and then also Mace, your website, so that people can follow. So
Sure.
let's do that.
Sure. The website for the nonprofit is beneaththerubble.org. And over there, you'll find a place where you'd find more about the book and a place to purchase it if you're interested.
It's a great book. So and then before Mace, you gave your website. I'm just curious. So the nonprofit is called Beauty Beneath the Rubble. Why is the website Beneath the Rubble?
It's easier to write.
It's very long.
I knew that,
We had
right?
a problem
It was like, no, I knew that because people are like, that's too long.
That's
right?
too long.
Quite a
I'm like,
mouthful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So that was
Yeah.
there was a genuine decision to do
Yes,
that, right?
exactly, yes.
Because I'm sure that Beauty Beneath the Rubble is available.
Yes, even that is it's a long title, but it shows you have to balance between conveying the message of what you're trying to do in your nonprofit and then making it easy.
Well, I'm glad you didn't call it BTR.
Yeah.
I mean, like and then Mace, give your website
My website is maceserafi.com.
and spell it for people.
So it's MAECESEIRAFI.com.
Okay,
First and last name.
and you are in the branding business.
Yes,
basically.
branding and brand
And
strategy.
how did you come to the project? How did you?
Yeah,
two
how did
meet?
you guys connect?
Actually, through Rashad.
Oh,
I had
Rashad.
seen-
It's all Rashad's
yeah,
fault.
this is how we
Rashad.
met. And I'd seen some of her work that she had done for a couple of other organizations. And when I knew this is what I wanted to do, I contacted her.
And do you have any connection to Syria or to that area?
I tried to travel as much as I could. I have been there. The last time was 2010. But my family travels almost every 2 years.
And your background is what?
I'm Syrian.
You're Syrian.
You're Syrian.
From
Okay,
what
that's
part
what
of
I
Syria?
Damascus.
From Damascus.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So it's interesting, and because your nonprofit, you set up just recently, right? I mean,
Yes.
how many years ago?
2 years ago, when with the beginning of this.
So the book was the catalyst to the nonprofit.
The book was a catalyst to the nonprofit. Yes.
Okay, so you wanted to tell the story. You wanted to tell it through the eyes of kids.
Yes.
You had personal experience being on the ground, had personal experience of having lived there. You probably saw also, and because I know the broadness of the mission statement, it's not limited to Syria. You have this sort of thing where it's kind of telling these stories, culturally connecting, amplifying the positive through the
Yes.
eyes of children's books, but it's
Yes.
really not limited to one conflict area.
No, and I spent about 10 years living abroad, in many times in conflict areas. And what happened when I came back to the U.S. and I turned on the TV or listened to the radio, I was quite upset by the things I was hearing because it contrasted so greatly to
what
what
you
I
knew in person.
experienced. I mean, living alone as a woman in conflict zones, I only survived because of the help of the people around me who were locals, who were the same locals that are chastised in today's media. And so when the war began, that's when I realized I wanted to do something. I was quite devastated, by all the wars that have occurred. It affects me personally, and I started volunteering with Syrian refugees in Jordan and in Lesbos, Greece. And I had written, I remember one thing I noticed is how much people hated refugees when they met with them, aside from the volunteers, the way they were being treated. And these were people I'd seen living with dignity just a few years back.
Yeah.
And so what I realized I had to do something more. And I actually did one night. This was something that I was mulling over night after night. And I woke up one night, I think at 4 a.m., 3 years ago, and I said, I'm going to write a book. A children's book. It's non-threatening, it's non-political, it provides education, and what I want to do is change a perception. And this is how I'm going to do it. And that's how the idea
Was there
came about.
anything at all that triggered that thinking for you, like that paradigm shift? Did you experience anything like that, or was it just a natural thing where you literally woke up and said,
I think I'd had so many political debates, and I was tired of fighting with people. I don't want to say why do you think this, why do you think that? Instead I thought, how can I take this responsibility upon myself, which is not being upset with you for hating refugees or hating or having negative perceptions of the Middle
Right.
East, but instead it's my job to educate you, and then let's see what you do with it.
Well, anybody that's been in those conversations, I think at some point in time realizes maybe that there's just so much of their energy has been wasted, so much of their time has been wasted, and nothing has come out of it. And at some point, it's not even enough to basically just express your opinion on the topic. If you genuinely are interested in improvement, then what else can you do? And this is actually a beautiful way for this energy to be rechanneled.
So can I ask you to read something from the book? Is there a passage that kind of summarizes? Because I'm trying to picture in my head. I get what you're trying to say, that the country, there's more to the narrative than doom and destruction.
Yes.
And there is beauty beneath the rubble. I'm trying to picture how you do that, because I got to believe there is a lot of rubble over there.
And it's a beautifully illustrated book. It's simple. It's very much a children's book, but there's a lot of content in here.
Yes, it's a children's book for adults in a way.
Adults.
So
there you go.
I would say ages 5 and over, because it does have a lot of history that we've
So I'm just wondering if you have some passages or
Sure.
examples or something there that kind of illustrates the story you're telling or how you tell
Well, and I think
it.
it's multi-generational, right?
It's multi.
It is,
yeah.
yeah.
Exactly, and that's why we chose a children's book, because it allows you to appreciate art.
While you're looking for that, I'll give you an interesting idea. This multi-generational. I now have a grandson, my one and only. He's just turned 5, and one of the things that my wife loves to do with him every night, which is a struggle sometimes because you'd rather be on the tablet or on the smartphone playing a video game or watching YouTube, but she gets him to sit down and reads a book. And what I find amazing is it slows him down. It gets him to sit for more than a second. It stops this kind of ADD behavior that all kids have, immediately click and hit something and jump in action, whatever. And the interplay between two different generations, my wife and him, it's beautiful to watch. The two of them just sit and tell whatever the silly story is. But to watch the two of them, and she looks forward to this, and he kind of looks forward to it. You have to kind of force him to do it, but once he does, he sits there enthralled as she turns each page. And I thought, wow, what a beautiful thing to watch. So I can imagine grandparents doing this with their grandchildren.
Yes.
Here's where I came from. Here's a story you don't know.
Well, and here's what's funny about what you just said, Paul, because how does the story start?
How does shall I read you? The
Well,
passage?
just because it's
Yeah.
it's interesting how these children actually go on to this journey, right?
Exactly. Yes.
How they find out that this is sort of what they should do
This is
or
what
what
they
they
should
want to
do.
do, right?
So take a minute, slow us down,
Sure.
and read us a
That
story.
might actually give Paul an idea of what
Exactly.
he can do.
I'll read you a bit from the beginning,
Yeah.
and I'll read you a bit from the middle, and you can ask me any questions you have.
Okay.
Have you ever looked at a map and wanted to jump right into it? Think of all the places you would see and the adventures you could have. But that is not possible. Or is it? Although she was only 10 years old, Laila had always wished she could jump into a map and go on a wild adventure. My grandfather was the world's greatest traveler, she would say to her friends. He visited over 40 countries, and one day I will do the same. Laila would dream of the places she would see and the people she would meet, but she didn't want to wait to be grown up to do this. She wanted to go now. Damascus, Somalia, Mali, and Spain, China, Sri Lanka, Iraq, and Bahrain, she'd sing to herself. On the other hand, Laila's younger brother Ahmed was not like her at all. No, he loved to stay home, and if the family went out together, he would hold on tightly to his mama's hand while hugging his soft white blanket. Any thought of leaving home made him nervous. And so I would ask you, who do you think Ahmed represents in this story?
Most of us.
Exactly. Yes, Laila is the wild adventurer, and Ahmed is maybe the xenophobe.
We
or
made a
person
movie
that's
about
afraid.
this. It's called The Wizard of Oz, and all she does the whole movie is click her heels and want to go home.
And it's also second child, first child dynamics too.
Exactly.
It's really
Yeah.
funny, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's how the story unfolds. They do end up finding themselves in Syria, and I'll read you one of the passages.
So can I
when-
stop you now? Here's a question I've
Sure.
always asked. I know many examples in my family and in my friends' families of both of those personalities.
Mm-hmm.
What is it born in you to want to see the world? I grew up in the Midwest, and the whole Midwestern ethic is stay home, stay near, do what your dad did. Let's just follow the tradition. Like it or not, you're going to live down the street from your parents, and you're going to do the same thing your parents did. And leaving is awful, horrible. I came to California. Well, sooner or later you're going to come home. You're going to smarten up, and everybody comes home sooner or later. We're all salmon, and we have to come back home sooner or later. What is it that brings? Why do you think those two personalities exist? And there doesn't seem to be a middle ground. You're either one or the other. You're either all in, I want to see the world, or you're all in, I don't care about the world.
Well, is that really? I mean, is that really an evaluation of the situation? Is that really a reflection of human condition, or is it really? I mean, you could argue that people are pushed to do certain things, right? Like to move outside their comfort zone.
Well, anthropologically, we do have, some of us have genetic markers that make us want to explore. And
Okay,
those are
that's
the-
what I'm
those are
getting
the
at.
ones that are
Because I know
harder,
I was
right?
that explorer. I wanted to go see, and everybody around was like, "What are you, nuts?" So I see so many of them. My daughter doesn't really care to see any of the rest of the world. Just why? Here's their question always.
So if you flip that on it, if you flip that though 180 degrees, Paul, it's interesting because you could ask the same question relevant to people that are displaced, people that are pushed outside of that because they don't have that affinity, they don't really want to.
Yeah, they didn't want to go.
And yet the assumption sometimes when we look at them that are dealing with this, it's almost like as if, oh, well, they're doing this on purpose. They're like I can keep thinking of people that we're always accusing of basically just immigrating illegally or refugees, and it's like if we are 50% of that population that's displaced really would have rather do anything but be displaced.
Right.
But are we really dealing with them with that reality and understanding, or do we deal with them as if it is like they're being put upon us for having been displaced?
Yes, like I know my mother. She was in Uganda when she was given 24 hours to pack a bag, one bag each, and leave the country.
Yeah.
And they were very
she was looking forward to that.
Oh yeah, I mean to go to Canada from a nice tropical environment to freezing cold Canada. It's not what she wanted.
Right.
I remember they had secondhand clothes. They went from an upper middle class life to one of secondhand clothing, working in factories, hanging their clothes out to dry and finding them frozen when they came home.
Yeah.
I mean just little things.
Yeah, my grandparents on my father's side were displaced in between 48 and 50 out of Palestine. It was like, everybody's Muslim there. No, we were Greek Orthodox, and my mother's Catholic, and we were displaced, and they literally had to flee across the border from Haifa, which was an international city with multiple religions being honored there, and we had to flee across the border, and there was some snipering happening, and it wasn't from Arabs. Snipering happening that was happening at my grandmother and her at that point 5 children. Basically, with nothing but bags, and trying to basically make it across the
And you said something a long time
border.
ago. You don't talk about it very often. I don't know why, but it's an amazing story that you've told just a couple of times on the Raad Life about your grandparents and how they had to move from country to country because even within the Arab community, the assumption was, well, gee, we're Arabic and we'll find a place in another Arabic country. They weren't too thrilled.
Well, that wasn't that. I mean, my grandfather, I'm sorry, I'm digressing off the topic here, but my grandfather basically and his brothers were involved in the accounting business. They were successful in Haifa. It was multi-generations of being there. They were displaced. My grandfather basically had to leave earlier, as my grandmother and my father and his siblings basically were seeking safety with family members in Jaffa or Jaffa. And basically, my grandfather went and tried to find work, and he and his brother ended up in Kuwait, and this was in 1950, let's say 1949, and there was not the infrastructure for school systems for families to have children basically be able to go to school in Kuwait at the time, so they ended up in Baghdad, not because the job opportunity wasn't, but he had a better job opportunity in Kuwait. And they ended up in Baghdad because then the kids could actually follow, and they had a system of schooling that could actually be where they could attend. And my father and his brothers and my uncles on my mother's side basically went to a Jesuit high school in Iraq.
Yeah.
So again, all of these things that I just shared are in complete conflict and contrast with what story gets told from a position of laziness in my book.
But when you had your one friend from the college come in here, one of your childhood friends came in here the one time on a show, and his family was displaced too from Palestine.
Yep.
And he said something like, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but he said something like, once you're displaced, you always kind of feel displaced.
Well, and I think that's something that people don't understand. Like, I was not displaced. My father was displaced, and his family, immediate family, was displaced. But that is part of your legacy and heritage that you carry with you. We have not been able to have a right of return, not even to basically feel like we belong somewhere or came from something, because all of the political aspects of it, vested interest, contrasting, conflicting interests, all this stuff. But at the crux of it, there's human beings and families and people's lives on a daily basis that are affected. And sometimes we blush over that very easily. Exactly. I mean, you worked in your role, even, being overseas, there's the policy.
Yes.
And there's the actual story on the ground.
I helped process the Iraqi refugees during during the war there, and the stories I heard were unbelievable. And you just can't, you don't forget what you hear, and those people, they want to live in Iraq, just a stable Iraq. So it's the
that's
same
all
thing.
that's all they're looking for.
Yeah.
They're not looking for twisted this or twisted that. They just want, like everybody else here, Mission Viejo, Irvine, Costa Mesa, Anaheim. They want the better for their families. They want safety and a sense of shelter, food on the table, a sense of economic sustainability. I mean, there's the basic ingredients of a
basic.
human existence.
Yes.
But what I find surprising is, after a generation goes by, I understand the people didn't want to leave. Now they're forced to live somewhere else. Canada, Germany, Turkey, Iraq, wherever it is, they're pushed out of someplace, and now they're someplace they didn't choose to be, but they have to be. And yet a generation or two goes by, and there's still that feeling of, we've lived here for a while, wherever it is, but we still don't belong.
Well, let me ask you this, Paul, because I could reference this, maybe not necessarily to you, but I can reference it to a whole bunch of Irish Americans.
Yeah.
Why is it that all of a sudden, a few years ago, there was an influx of Irish Americans going to Ireland to get their Irish citizenship in addition to their American citizenship? What was it about the affinity to need to connect? Even though this is not just 1 or 2 generations away, this is multiple generations away.
I feel a connection to Ireland and an interest to know, even though my great-grandfather came over in 1840 in the Great Famine. That was the defining moment in Irish history when the whole society collapsed. They lived on one crop, potatoes, and the whole thing collapsed for a couple of years.
Economic depression
and
basically caused you to get on a boat and come over.
A third of the population died. A third of the population was malnourished. A third of them emigrated.
Was that called a caravan at the time?
Yeah, it was. Well, you go back and look up Irish anti-immigration in Wikipedia. There's a whole page.
No,
it was the first.
Absolutely.
It was the first wave of anti-immigrant wave.
Yes.
Well,
the
yeah.
Ku Klux Klan was equally aghast at these papists, these Catholics that were coming over from a strange religion who followed a foreign faith. They were seen by the English as dogs and drunkards.
We
and
had
everything.
We had the same thing happen with Italians. We had the same thing
Exactly.
happens with the
Irish were the first to feel that, and-
Vietnam,
yeah,
Cambodia,
right. Yeah.
etc.
Japanese,
Japanese, right.
We forget about the Japanese.
Yeah,
This is a
Japanese.
recurring ugly theme in American history, this nativism that pops up, and get rid of them. We don't want those people in here.
So let me ask you this, because Paul made an assumption that it is an ugliness in American. Okay, I think it's an ugliness that is not necessarily limited to one place or the other. Do you agree or not?
Yeah, no. I mean, people are afraid of something that's not familiar to them. So the good thing about look at it. Despite all of our stories here, we're all sitting here in this room today and living fairly happy lives. And
Yeah.
so the beauty that's beyond that is that eventually, when we do tell people who we are, they do accept us eventually. That's the beauty of America, and I hope that continues to be the beauty of America, and of all these other countries we live in that around the world that have diverse populations. It's true for all of them, but there is always hope.
I remember spending 3 months on the island of Mauritius. Okay, and I tell people Mauritius is an interesting microcosm because they conduct their business in English. They read their news in French. You walk down the street and there's a Sikh temple next to a mosque, next to a church, next to a shrine, and it's all cohesive. They were under occupation by the French. They were under occupation by the British. They have a strong sense of hospitality, tourism. They're very friendly that way, and yet there's this coexistence that happens, and this is on an island.
Yeah.
Island is the best. Island life is the best.
Island is the best life,
Yes,
right?
that's where my dad grew up in a very similar fashion in Zanzibar.
And I would argue to my friends who are so pro-Trumps out there, all of my friends and relatives from the
I thought you were
Midwest,
going to keep your politics
who've
out of it.
forgotten where they came from, and that we were the first wave of refugees that came over in the late 1800s from Ireland and then Eastern Europe and whatnot, that were in Southern Europe, that were hated and unwanted, and all the things being said today about immigrants were said about us back then. That what, in my opinion, has made America great is its willingness and ability to bring that diversity together, and to, the Statue of Liberty doesn't say give me your best and your brightest. It says give me your tired masses yearning to be free. Give me the bottom of the barrel, the ones nobody wants. we'll sprinkle a little freedom, a little opportunity, and watch what grows.
Well, the ideal behind that is definitely there, and like you said, hopefully will continue to be there. I think sometimes we forget that it doesn't just happen.
No.
And that we actually have to be part of what makes it or helps it along the
Exactly.
way.
Yes, it's
And
our
rem-
responsibility, in my opinion, to help other people understand who we are and why they should like us.
Right.
Why
But to
not?
also
Because
add
we're
to
really
that,
very likable
we're
once
all
they get to us.
immigrants. I mean, we're all immigrants. There's no such thing as American. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah,
Native
other than a small
Americans-
group of Native Americans that were
Exactly.
here,
So
they were
we're all
all immigrants.
immigrants.
You know that
Right.
it's funny, and terminology is important. Speaking of storytelling
Yes.
and language and narrative,
Yes.
right? Terminology is super important because in the United States, I remember from day one, the way that this was described was that we are a melting pot.
Yes.
Interestingly, and only when I traveled to Canada did I realize that in Canada, they don't refer to themselves as a melting pot. They refer to themselves as a mixing pot. Okay, the word mixing versus melting, it's the same
Oh.
friggin' letter that starts the word, but the meaning is so different. In Canada, at least in metropolitan areas like Toronto, Vancouver, and places like that, the mixing pot analogy is that it basically doesn't kill the specific flavor of every ingredient that is in the recipe.
Yeah.
Okay, a melting pot makes an amalgam out of everything that goes into the pot.
Sure.
And so it's an interesting, words mean things. This is
They
just
do.
a
Yeah, of
one
course,
word
they do.
difference starting with the same exact letter. But now I'm not saying that Canada basically, they espouse to that, but maybe they don't necessarily achieve it every single time. But it's an interesting thing. Like, I wonder what it would be if we actually just changed the narrative of how we refer to the people and the different threads that makes the fabric of America, and we start talking about it being not all making a stew,
Right.
but actually where I can still taste the flavor of the different ingredients. I mean, anybody who eats and has a discerning palate will tell you that in the case of a meal that actually I can taste the ingredients of the meal, that is going to be a much more positive experience for me than one where it's just a bunch of glub that all makes
Pureed like a baby
parade
food.
like a baby food.
But
So,
that's
hey,
the way-
America, stop eating baby food parade cultural diversity.
But that's
Okay,
the-
start wanting the ingredients to be flavorful enough to tell what they are.
But that's where I grew up in the Midwest. It was bland. If it wasn't bland, if anything that wasn't bland was bad. It was all supposed to be just, craft cheese. It was all supposed to be tasteless, and spice was bad, hot was bad, unique was bad.
Well, even the Midwest is changing, Paul.
It really has.
So go ahead and read
some else here.
the rest
Read
part of
sure.
it, and then I
Yeah.
want to switch a little bit about the importance of storytelling.
Sure. I'll just read you this a little paragraph.
Yeah.
Read me a story.
Okay. As they headed in the direction of Damascus, Laila and Ahmed traveled up and down hills until they came to a large mountain. "This is Mount Qasyun," Laila said, reading a sign on the path as the camel let them down. Both the children smiled as they remembered stories about this mountain. It was one of their favorites and their grandpa's too. Together they recited a rhyme they had memorized from his stories. "Approaching the city, I climbed Mount Qasyun, gazing across in the light of the moon. They say great prophets once stood in this place, admiring the city across time and space." And that is the story of the cover, as you can see here. And this is something that many people from Damascus do on a daily basis.
And so, did they wander the world? How do their parents just say, "Go ahead, take a camel, and off you go"?
No,
Or-
No.
there's an element of
Here's
magical realism.
here's a credit card.
Yeah,
Here's a
exactly.
credit card.
There's an element of magical realism here, and so I'll let you read the book to find out how they got there.
And they wander the entire country, or do they wander?
They end up wandering to a lot of the country and seeing many of the diverse sites around the country.
And in the process, they learn what you're trying to teach us, that it is a diverse place. It's not what you think it is. It's more
and
than
it's
you
beautiful.
think it is.
And the fact that
beautiful.
it's beautiful and has so much history, why should we care about Syria? It's and it shows you that.
Well, the thing that I found also kind of touching is that, Laila basically is a little naughty. She goes into her, but that's
She's a
secure.
strong
That's why.
Is that what you were drawn to here, you naughty boy?
I'm always drawn to strong females, but no, she actually basically goes in and rummages through some of the stuff that's in her mother or parents' room, and there's a chest with some notes and writings and stuff like that from her grandfather, and she comes across one, and makes her realize that she's just like her grandfather.
Yes.
Right? And it's a note that says, "My dearest grandchildren, I'm so proud of you. Now it's time for you to see the world too. I've planted some clues to lend you a hand. They lead to a gift in a faraway land. Begin at the castle to find your first clue, and know that my blessings will travel with you. Okay?
Wow, that's magical.
Here's a
I like
hint.
that.
Look for a helping hump.
Yes.
Okay. So again, in this story, there's also sort of this treasure map component, this journey, this quest kind of component, way in, right? So it's really wonderful. So with that being said, and thank you for reading.
Yes, sure.
Okay. It's always good to hear
Just
it
a
in the
quick
voice of the
question.
author.
Yeah.
Do you know who Ibn Battuta is?
Yes, I know who
You
Ibn Battuta
do.
is.
How about?
I'm old enough to know who Ibn Battuta is.
I don't know.
He's actually a traveler that traveled more than Marco Polo.
Yeah.
But he's kind of been brushed aside by our narrative here, and so I wanted to bring him back because he's one of my role models.
Ibn Battuta, yes, was a
Yes.
very, very known traveler, documented a lot of his
Explorer.
travels, explorer.
Yeah, he wrote the first travel journal in our known times.
What period was this? What?
In the 1300s.
Okay.
Yeah, he was a Berber from Morocco and traveled all around the world. They say he actually had children all around the world as well.
Well, if you're traveling all around the world, you got to occupy
Well, you
yourself
might be
somehow.
descended from one of them here. You're ethnically ambiguous
I am ethnically
here.
ambiguous.
Ethnically
so you never know.
ambiguous. But I want to. Okay, so let's switch gears for a minute because in this day and age, right, everybody's attention span is very short. We're digesting content in a different manner. You've chosen it in a book format that
Yes.
requires actually somebody flipping pages, right? I don't know. I don't have time to flip pages. I know. So I'm on a side note. I'm expecting a narrated version of this on audio
Or a
on
video game.
audiobooks.
I thought it'd be a very video game.
Yeah, those
he's
are
off.
actually in the works, so yes.
Right. But with that being said, and Mace, this is maybe more to you as well, is because I know that in your approach to what you do for your business is storytelling is a big deal,
Oh yeah,
right?
that's the core.
So let's talk about that because I agree with you. I think it's super important regardless. I mean, this is a book with children, but you can apply it to business. You can apply it to just messaging in general, right?
Right.
And it has changed. It has changed dramatically. I mean, we're sitting here in the studio basically putting this out on Facebook and YouTube, right, live.
Talking for an hour.
Without having to have gone through a big, huge building with large machines and all this stuff. I mean, the cost of entry to digital content development has become very easy to do, but that doesn't mean that the quality of the content is necessarily
because we've lost the art of storytelling. We crave it. Brands are trying to rediscover it. Tell us our story, your brand story. Tell us your origin story. But we, as a society, in my opinion, have lost that long form narrative storytelling that goes back.
But we have an opportunity now because of the way we digest information.
Yeah.
To actually be exposed to that, right? So share a little bit with when you basically approach, and we can use this as an example, but just in general, okay, what is your philosophy in terms of digital content development and when it comes to storytelling?
I think when it comes to digital content is if we want to take a look at what the core of the story is and see how we can branch it out into so many different topics, whether that be an Instagram story, whether that be something on a blog page, which is something that you're always counting on all the time, whether it's interviews with certain types of people who find an affinity with the story, the families who have been reading this book, what is the story? So the story is pretty
personal
much,
share in terms of impact.
Yeah, so that becomes part of the brand story for this extension of the book.
Sure.
So how are parents and their kids reacting to this story time with their children? I mean, in the case of immigrants, it's one thing, but it's also another case with families who are second generation, third generation Syrians living here whose kids don't know what Syria is.
Right.
So how does that story pan out in a way where it defines the book in a whole different kind of category, where it starts to transcend not just what Laila and Ahmed are about, but how do characters start to relate to real life characters in the real world? So it has very much different components. Like you said, this could translate into social media very easily. This can translate into a video game. This can translate into a narrative, like just narrating the story in general.
Well, like
So,
almost
every touch point.
town hall share almost of how it has impact. You could have joint sessions of where people read and share their thoughts on it. You can bring in people that are more recent refugees and basically have them share their reference. That's another added layer on this basic structure,
Of course.
right, of the story and the location stuff. And I noticed some of that already in the page for the nonprofit, where you are actually starting to already have subtabs and breakdowns of like more focused parts of the story.
Yes.
And so I see that. And so do you think that that basically applies to pretty much anything? I mean, it's obviously in its own custom tailored approach, but do you think that that applies to pretty much anything that we should be putting out there as far as digital content
Definitely.
or storytelling?
Yeah, I think just in general, when you focus on the story of the brand, which is where the core of it lies.
Where it came from.
Where it came
Why
from. Where
did they do it?
The origin
Yeah.
story, which
The
you
origin
use the
story.
origin story, that's a
Yeah.
very strong way to describe it.
And then, because if we don't have that, what do we have? Whether it's a business, whether it's a persona that's trying to perceive their own brand, or whether it's a product-based business or service-based business. I mean, if we don't have that story, what do we have?
Well, existing or new, because that's the
Yeah.
other thing too. Is I see a lot of times where mistakes are done in all fields, basically, interiors being one of them, graphics, branding. I mean, all of it, where people basically don't understand the need to actually really genuinely establish that, and with an authentic voice,
Sure.
not just a curated
Yeah.
voice.
And what
It
I
may-
see,
a curated voice may even be successful, but it will not be sustainable.
what I see sitting in this chair day after day and trying to get people to tell stories or listening to them tell stories is stories are an incredible way to connect with people. You can tell me facts and figures all day, but what I'll remember are the stories.
But-
maybe it's because there's a shared narrative. Maybe it's a way to shared experience or that brings back something from my youth or my past. But whatever it is, stories connect with people.
But you need to have
do.
courage to tell that story authentically.
yeah, it's
Very
got to be
true.
real. It can't be a fake story.
You can't. I mean, you. We've all sat in meetings. We've all sat in exchanges, conversational, even social gatherings, and heard people share. And you can tell a mile away when the share is not necessarily disingenuous, but the share is surface. The share is not really one that's welcoming deeper engagement. Okay,
Sure.
it's just small talk. Right?
Can I give you the perfect example? That it's we do business shows mostly, networking events. Hey, how's your business? It's great. How's your business? Everybody's great. And it's like, am I the only one suffering? Am I the only one struggling? Am I the only one with questions? When you get somebody who really opens up and is vulnerable and say, I'm not sure, we're uncertain about this, we've had a problem, that's when people get real. And everybody's afraid to do that when they come in here or any of these places. I don't want to look weak. I don't want to. But when you do that, people respond so
You know, there was an
incredibly.
article, and I have
Very
to
true.
find it. I came across it this week, and I glanced and I put it aside because, again, we don't have time. We have to digest things in a different manner.
Yeah.
Right? But, I mean, I have to read. It's online. It's easily accessible, but I couldn't read it because I didn't have like 5 minutes to read it, right? I had 5 minutes to read it. I should have read it, right? But now I'm feeling like a fool because I can't tell you more than one thing that resonated with me, but at least I did take one thing out of it. And that is, it was discussion about what people like successful, I hate the word successful because, you know, it's always measured in terms of, you know, maybe profit or whatever, but let's just say it in general, that people that are achieving people, when they approach small talk, this article is basically saying, it was from I can't remember if it was Harvard or something, but it was an interesting study. They said, they found out that, to Paul's point, you know, when you are in a situation, a social gathering or a networking opportunity, and you go, you know, hey, what do you do? Or, you know, whatever. No, the alternative of what they're saying people actually ask, and oh, this is scary as hell, right? Hey, hi, how you feeling today?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Totally.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
You asked me how I'm feeling today.
I have to reveal.
Sensory overload. Can't do this. I can't let you in that close, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it goes back to that thing we're talking about storytelling, and it's really engaging,
It is, yeah.
right? Connecting.
It's
the
revealing. and it's
human
engaging,
condition of
yeah.
needing to connect with people, but it requires courage,
It does, yeah. Not
which is kind
everyone's
of
very.
sad a little bit, right?
That's something we deal with our clients too, is how do they open up and
Yes.
how are they able to get comfortable with telling their story, and what kind of roadblocks do we have to get through for them to feel comfortable?
All the time.
So
See it all
what?
the
So what
time.
do you think? I mean, is it just societal to a certain extent? Is it just, I've been there, opened up. Is it all of that stuff?
It's a combination of things. It could be just people coming from different countries who think they have to have a certain image. It could be just something that comes from
Good
a
point.
specific point of view, as like maybe I shouldn't go too deep, maybe I shouldn't go that far. So
No, they really don't want to know.
maybe they don't want to know much about that. So
Isn't that
let's
true?
just
They're just
focus
being
on-
nice.
Isn't that true in human relations? When you meet that significant other and you finally start opening up, you're giving them the power to hurt you, the power.
Yeah,
You
you're
know,
vulnerable.
so
You're
And
being vulnerable.
How
Yeah.
many of us even know the stories of our own families? One project
Yeah.
that we're working on, we have a very large extended family now, is recording the stories of our families.
The living
Can I give you an
living history? We don't know much.
Can I give you an example of that? For years, going back to my youth, I was fascinated in the story of my family, and almost nobody knows it. It's not that fascinating, but nobody could tell me what my grandfather's name was, or my grandfather's great-grandfather, what he did. So I started asking people through the years, and I encourage everybody, take this test as you go home. Take this as a takeaway from this show here. Go home and ask anybody you know, your friends, your family, what their grandfather's name was. Just their name, much less. And then if you really want to be bold, tell me the great-grandparents, just their names or what they did.
But see,
And
Arabs
I'm
have
gonna-
an advantage when it comes to that.
It's in our middle
See,
name.
because we don't have middle names. We have our lineage is in our name.
But I'm going to tell you that most people don't know anything about
It's
their
a little
grandparents.
sexist, though. It's all on the male side of it, but that's still, halfway. We're halfway there.
Unless you're part of the Ashanti Empire in Ghana, where it's a female lineage.
Oh, I didn't know.
Reverse
Reversing.
But try that. I mean, most Americans can't
Thank you.
tell you, and I suspect most people around the world, maybe in other cultures it's different. But here in America, because we all came from somewhere else, and when the immigrants come, most of them, that's the end of the story. I don't want to talk about what happened before. We're here now. We're Americans, and we're starting a new life, right or wrong, and it sort of starts from here. And I don't see most Americans know anything about 2 or 3 generations ago. In the same way that when I've gone to Europe, it's that building's from the 1400s. This was here from the 1300s. So it's all around you, that history. Here we don't have such an ancient history, and most people came here escaping something. And my friend's grandfather was a perfect example. He's from Holland, and he struggled to speak English all the years he lived here. But he refused to let his grandchildren, my friend, speak anything but English around him. He said, "We are Americans now."
You know,
if we,
go
I
ahead.
was going to say, if we knew the history of our ancestors here, then we would actually build empathy for those around
Yes.
us who are now in similar situations.
Exactly, right.
Well, and I mean, we actually have a saying in Arabic that basically, loosely translated, says that those who forget their roots have no roots.
And I think most Americans
Those
have
who
no
forget
roots.
their origin don't have an origin, right? I mean, and it's sort of true. I'm not saying that you cannot own the positive in your origin and then also come to terms with the negative in your origin. I'm not saying that it's all rosy, but there is such a thing as heritage and history, and it's not so much about ego and pride, but if you don't have a sense of where you originate and come from, it becomes I think a bit of a difficulty to see the vision of where you go.
It's like
But
an
I'll give you
identity
just another
crisis.
example. So I've been on Ancestry now. I've been researching my.
I mean,
a lot.
so Paul, let me just interrupt you. Okay, perfect example. If there was not such a hunger and an interest in basically having your roots, figure out where your roots are, where you came from, why would Ancestry have been
Yeah.
become such a success over the last
But
10
but
years?
not everybody has the same fascination. Most of the people in my family don't have a fascination for. When I tell them the stories I've learned, they're like, "Okay, great. Who cares?" My grandmother was her father was born on a boat, fleeing the famine. He was born on one of these refugee boats. And what's amazing is most kids died on these boats because there's no sanitation, there's no doctors, hundreds of people jammed in a boat that's supposed to carry 30. And they call them coffin ships in those days, as I've learned.
Yep.
So he came over and he lived. Now, he was embarrassed of that story, apparently, and she was embarrassed of that story, so she never told me. I'd ask her as a kid, tell me about him. No, I don't want to tell you anything about him. So I go on Ancestry, and I find that I'm related to this guy who was born on one of these famine ships, and in Ireland, he's celebrated because so few kids live. There's a family museum, and there's a statue of my great-grandfather being held by his mother there, and the boat that he was on, because it was one of the few owned by an Irishman, has been recreated as an example of a good example of what could happen.
Yes, it's a positive story
A positive
from the Irish
story.
coast.
So, and we actually got contacted by authors, and we were invited to Ireland to go see this. And I thought, I grew up ashamed of this. My grandmother, my mother, everybody was ashamed of this story.
Sadly.
All they wanted to do was forget it. And there, it's celebrated. They see it in a
Let me ask you
different way.
something, Paul. How many shows do you have on this station?
About 20 some.
Okay.
20 plus.
How many of the people that basically you see on a weekly basis in this studio in such an intimate setting actually know that about you?
Oh, almost none, probably.
Okay. So once again, you've just
Tell
proven
your
to us
story.
the
Yeah.
interesting need
tell your story.
about storytelling.
Yeah. It is amazing to me. So I think part of it is...
Is that funny what happens when you actually have a non-structured, open, vulnerable, courageous conversation?
I didn't know that you were Palestinian until about a year into this show.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, because I don't. That's not the only thing badge that I put on my chest. I am who I am, but that who I am is a combination of where I came from, of the struggles and successes of the people who came from before me. One of my very, very favorite sayings in the world, and it's not something from Arabic, it's something I picked up when I was here, is that we stand on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah. But I knew that you
That
had
is
lived...
why we stand high, because we stand on the shoulders of giants.
But I'll challenge you a little bit here. I knew you'd lived in Kuwait. I knew that very early on. I knew you had lived in Baghdad. And I was trying to figure out, well, who is this guy? Is he Iraqi? Is he Kuwaiti?
Well,
is he
I'm culturally
Ethnically ambiguous.
ethnically ambiguous on purpose.
somehow
Ethnically
that,
ambiguous. Give me a 5.
somehow that Palestinian connection was difficult for you to share, or it wasn't the first part of it.
It wasn't difficult for me to share. It's one, unfortunately, I will say this. It's one that basically is misunderstood and maligned. It is one that basically causes confusion, because when I start sharing that, people will be... I'm not proud of it. I am proud of it. But to tell somebody, you're from the Middle East, you're Palestinian, you're Greek Orthodox on one side and Catholic on the other, to the point where you're making a joke about partying with the Greek Orthodox one night and then feeling guilty about it with the Catholics in the morning, right?
Right.
And then also the fact that you were born in Iraq. Oh, we just had a war there. I mean, it's like everybody's there is just either displaced refugees or basically couldn't wait to get out of there because they were under oppression. No, that wasn't the case in my existence. Okay, grew up in Kuwait, lived in Abu Dhabi for 2 years when there was nothing but sand. Okay, went to school in Switzerland on the side of a mountain. Yes, I know, elitist name dropping. Blah blah blah. Summered in the UK and basically came here for a master's degree in marketing at the Drucker Center. Ended up doing interior design, which is in complete conflict with a lot of basic,
All seems clear to me.
A creative outlet. Okay, what happens to most people with that is sensory overload. Okay, because it defies and flies in the face of stereotypical packaging that they have been fed and are... I'm not picking on them, but out of laziness or complacency, okay, did not dare to challenge or care to challenge.
We want you to be
And yet,
one
all
thing.
the information, and yet, all the information that you need to formulate your own opinion about every single thing that I talked about and all the nuances and complexities of that mixing pot versus melting pot exists in every college library in this country, and it requires just the curiosity and desire to explore.
Yeah.
To open a book, like the one we're talking
Open a
about
book.
today.
And luckily, you don't have to go to a college library.
No, you can go to...
Where do we get the book?
You can get it on Amazon. You can go get it on the website Beneath the Rubble. But I think one thing about a children's book, they're not threatening. So you don't. So
Yes.
what in this age of digital media, you need something that's shorter, not so doesn't require you to be in a library always to kind of tell a story.
No, I'm just using
Right?
that as a reference. I remember when I came over here in '85 and was going to Claremont. All this information is available now. At the time,
Yes.
we had to go through like index cards to basically find it. Right? Don't go there, Paul. Okay, but it things these days are even closer. You can just Google, and you'll have more information. That what you need is the skill set to discern information.
Yeah.
And the curiosity to learn more.
Of course.
Always,
Exactly.
always, and the name in the title of the book by the most interesting man in the world when he wrote this book is basically says stay
Stay curious.
curious,
I love that.
and
Very
always
true.
always explore.
Well, thank you for exploring with us. Give us the name of all this stuff again here. Spell it all
And the
out so
websites.
people can
Yes,
find
sure.
it.
The website is beneaththerubble.org. So BENEATHTHERUBBLE.org, O-R-G. The book is The Adventures of Laila and Ahmed in Syria. And this book has been quite a success so far. So Laila and Ahmed will be traveling soon to Iraq by popular vote and other countries that are facing conflict.
And if you're interested in basically
travels
covering
continue.
some of the travel costs for Laila and Ahmed, basically, I'm sure you can donate on that website.
And a few years
And
later,
if you can't spell it correctly, Beyond the Rubble, Google has spell check on it. It'll correct it for you.
and a few years later, after they've done the Middle East, I want them to come over to Ireland, and another beautiful country that people don't know enough about.
Exactly.
Fun.
See, they can go everywhere.
Multicultural.
The options are endless.
Yeah.
They're multicultural explorers.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank you
so
for
much.
coming.
And Mace, give people your website too, please.
So it's Mace Serafi, and it's spelled MAECESEIRAFI.com.
And I thank you both for being here. It's a very interesting conversation.
Yes.
Very interesting.
And thanks for
having us.
sharing your stories.
Yes. Likewise.
and adding it to the fabric of the Raad Life.
Now, it's funny. It's funny. I will just end with this. When we first started the show, I had no clue what I was doing. I had no idea what this format was going to be like. Yeah, I know. I'm still here for 4 years later. I must be doing something okay. But the interesting thing about it is early on, because we were talking about baby boomers, we were talking about things that were difficult to talk about. We did not shy away from that. We actually engaged it. And the interesting juxtaposition for me, sitting on this side of the table, is when people would come in, we'd talk about stuff, sometimes stuff that you wouldn't talk about in your own families. It's just tough. Like, I don't want to go there. It's too uncomfortable. They would leave empowered. Everybody that left out of this thing because of the exchange was
And feeling
empowered.
up.
Yeah. Feeling up and empowered. And
Yeah.
we just talked about Dying 101. We just talked about hospice, but we're feeling like we have come together and we are walking away from this conversation with something. You, at the very least, feeling better at having had the conversation, right?
Yes.
I firmly believe that we are
Yes.
better off when we have conversations. And then Paul, at one point, basically, being a flippant Irishman that he is, basically dubs me
Drunk most of the time, yeah,
says,
right.
he says, the age explorer.
Yes.
Okay, so while we were talking about this, and we were talking about travel, we were talking about curiosity and stuff like that, I just want to say thanks, Paul, because I mean, I never really thought myself in my own head clearly as that, but that is how I have probably lived my life. I can look back at decisions I have made, and there's definitely this curiosity and exploration, sometimes more courageous than others, right? But I think embrace that. Everybody, I think, has that gene. Just to varying degrees, right? Embrace that. Have the courage to actually explore. Have the curiosity to basically look at things through different filters. Don't be so closed up to things. And what's the point of living if you can't continue to grow and learn and basically experience different things?
And different ages of your life, different ages and stages, open you to different possibilities. When you get older, you suddenly can go back and look at your roots. When you're young, you should be asking everybody around where you came from. Maybe there are times in your life you're less interested or more interested. When you have children, suddenly it becomes important. Where do I come from? Because they start asking you those kinds of questions.
And I will share one. I think it's something that I came up with, but maybe not. But I will share with this.
We'll
because
credit you.
Well, because I always refer to this, and maybe it is, and you can quote me if you want. But I always tell people, be careful. Do not rob yourself from the uniqueness of your own story. And with that, ladies, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
thanks everybody for joining us on the Raad Life this week. We will not be back next week or the week after because I will be traveling and exploring.
That's right.
Okay,
Living it.
And we'll be back in April. But we will, you can follow me on Facebook and on Instagram. I'll probably be sharing some of my explorations. If I am so inclined, I might even do a little interviewing while on the air, or not on the air, on the ground, wherever I'm landing. So you can follow me at the Raad Life. You drop us a note. Let us know what you think about this. And you know what? I'm going to open it up. Why don't you reach out to us on social media, and especially on Facebook, and share your story.
There we go.
Maybe it will mean that we ask you to be in the studio to share it on the air with everybody. But share your stories. Let's start talking. Thanks, everybody.
That's great.
You have been listening to the Raad Life radio show with your host and age explorer, Raad Gantos, brought to you on the one and only octalkradio.net. Join us again next week as we continue our journey of discovery into life's challenges, opportunities, options, and all the latest and greatest things that come with getting older.